Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well. My name is Lacy. I am one of the area coordinators for residence life at the University of Richmond. I'm finishing up my first year here.
And I'm Shelby Suffridge. I'm also an area coordinator at the University of Richmond, also finishing up my first year.
So we know this wasn't the ideal way to have your summit for ACUHO-i. However, we did want to make sure that you got all this information. So Shelby and I are going to be completing a presentation on finding fit, because we know that a lot of you are starting to look into the job search and try to figure out where you want to move on next after grad school.
Alrighty, so first to kind of kick us off, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is fit. I think that I most often have heard of this in context of employer to candidate. So for example, employers trying to figure out if a candidate and their strengths and their values align with the job position and the team and the organization that they'll be working within. But we want to flip that narrative a little bit for you all today, because it's just as important that you all are finding good fit and that you feel like you are a strong candidate for the position, that you feel like your strengths are aligned and your values align with the team and the organization, as it is the other way. So we want to provide you with some skills to kind of think about how you walk through that process. Obviously, at the end of the day, there's no way to know with certainty whether anything is the right fit or the right job for you, but we hope that this will just provide you with those skills as you're walking through that experience to evaluate different institutions and jobs and teams.
So in terms of the components of fit, this is not an exhaustive list. There are so many different things that can play a role in determining if a job is the right fit for you. And also what matters to you in the job search may be completely different from your peers and from what matters to them. But these are a lot of the things that do come up. So I just wanted to kind of go over those, not too in depth, but just in general. So first off, non-negotiables. So what are non-negotiables? Those are the things that you refuse to negotiate in the job search. So an example for me is I have 2 cats, and I was not going to accept a job where I couldn't have my cats with me in a live-on position. So that was something that was not negotiable for me. So if a job said, oh, so sorry, you can't have your cats, then that wasn't the job for me. That goes the same way for people who have partners. So if you're married or you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a partner that you want to move on to campus with you, and a university says, nope, sorry, they can't be there with you, then maybe you say, okay, that's not good for me either. So same thing as the components of fit, non-negotiables can also change for each person. Other things that can take part in this is your supervisor or boss. A lot of people say that who your supervisor is can make or break a job. I've certainly found that. But having a good relationship, having someone who has a supervisory style that you appreciate and relate with well, can really make a difference. Job content, how satisfying are the daily tasks that you have assigned to you? So maybe it's in the ideal location and you're near family and all this stuff, but what you're doing day to day is just gonna be super boring. Is that something you're okay with, or is that something that is gonna make too big of a difference in your job search? Opportunity for advancement. Are you going to a position where you do this position and then you have to move on, or are you going somewhere where you could potentially be promoted up the ladder? And is that something that's important to you as well? Mission and vision of the office. Do they align with your values? Are they working toward goals that are important to you? So thinking that through and looking through that before you go into the interview as well. And then one of the big ones, of course, job security and salary. Depending on where you're going to be, is the salary and the benefits going to be able to support you in that position? Work environment and office culture. So that has a lot to do with your coworkers, ties back in with your supervisor and boss, but is it laid back? Is it friendly? Is it, collaborative, or are you expected to just come in, get the job done, and go home? What does that look like for you? What are you looking for in your work environment? Also, the size of the university. Do you want a public or a private institution? That might not matter to you at all, or it might be the most important thing to you. But kind of thinking through those things. What are you looking for the actual university or college? The amount of interaction with students. Obviously, we are all student affairs. Students are a big reason why we do our work. How much are you going to get to work with them? Are you seeing them every single day? Are you only kind of interacting with them every once in a while? What does that look like? And then finally, just another one to consider is office space, which might sound silly, but where is it? Do you have a window, or are you going to be locked up in a room where you can't see outside all day? And then also, are you sharing that office? or is it your own space? And does that matter to you as well? Do you feel like you can't get work done if you're going to have to share that space? So asking those questions early. And we'll dive a little bit into this for our own experiences later in the presentation, but these are just a few components for you to consider.
So in thinking about how do you determine which things matter to you, because that was a very comprehensive list, and I think all of those things matter to everyone, just with a certain weight put on each thing. So a supervisor may be, a good supervisor may be more important to me, whereas the work that you do with students may be more important to you. And so each individual person has to determine what are the things that matter, what is the weight that is put on each of those things. And so I think that a big portion of being able to determine that for yourself is self-reflection, thinking a lot about the past and what you're doing currently, as well as thinking about the future and what you hope to do then, I think can provide you with some clarity regarding, what are the things that matter to me the most? What are the things I'm willing to compromise? What are the things I'm not willing to compromise on? So similarly to the last slide, this is definitely not an exhaustive list of questions you can ask yourself, but these are ones that I found helpful when I was going through my search. So first, what responsibilities in my current or past position do I find most fulfilling? And I think it's important to look back and think of the themes of the things that come up for you when you're thinking about what am I doing now? What have I done in the past that have made me feel the most excited? What is something that I leave this meeting? Maybe it's difficult, maybe it's conduct for you, and conduct meetings can be really difficult, but you leave a conduct meeting and you're energized, and even if it was hard, you think, I think that went really well. Then you would know that's something that you find really fulfilling. And there can be multiple of those things, and it's important to pay attention to those things as you're moving through your search. The other side of that coin is what responsibilities in my current or past position do I find the most draining. And this is important too, because as much as you want to know what you really enjoy, you also need to know what is something that you really don't enjoy, or that you just, like I said, find draining. And I think a good example of this is maybe you're someone who admin work just drains you. I don't love budget paperwork. That's something for me that, like, some of those admin tasks can just take it out of me. And so if you're in a position that's going to be largely admin work, or really heavy on that and less heavy on the student interaction, that's probably going to be a more draining position for you. You might feel less fulfilled. And so those are important things, again, to keep track of. Next, when have I felt the most challenged by a supervisor or mentor? This is important when thinking about that supervision relationship. And you can substitute out challenge for what matters for you. So you could say, when have I felt the most supported by a supervisor or mentor? When have I felt the most inspired by a supervisor or mentor? There's lots of words that you can interchange there for what's important, but I think this will help you get at when I'm looking to interview at another institution or whatever organization you're interviewing for. What do you want out of that supervision relationship? Being able to communicate that and being able to ask questions to know what that'll look like in that relationship is important. And then what position do I hope to hold after this? So that was something that I thought a lot about in my search is, what are the skills that I really need to get in this next job to get me where I want to go? I'm not always good about thinking long-term, 5 years, 10 years. But it's an important practice to have that future thinking, so you make sure that you're still on that path that you want to be on. And then lastly, are there any non-job related factors that are influencing my search, and what weight am I putting on these factors? This goes back to what Anna was talking about with some of those non-negotiables. Is it really important for you to have a partner live with you? Is it really important for you to be close to a community, be close to family? There's a lot of those non-job related factors that do end up playing a large part in our search process. And so those are good things to name and write down and just have in your mind as you're going through the search. So I would encourage you all right now, if you want to just pause the presentation, and you can take 2 to 3 minutes and write down some of the components that matter to you when determining fit, reflect on these questions, reflect on your own questions. But I just think that this is a great practice for everyone to have.
So now that you've kind of thought through what the things are that matter to you in the job search, I'm going to kind of talk about how you determine if that job is going to respect those things and meet those values for you. So we all know that we have to come up with good questions to ask at the end of the interview, right? you know that it's important to come in with those prepared. However, it's even more important to make sure that you're really thinking about what those questions are and making sure that they're the right questions. So before I go a little bit more in depth with that, I'm gonna play this short video for you and just give you a couple minutes of info about potential interview questions that you could ask. Shelby, I think you have to play it.
Oh, you are right. There we go.
Okay, so kind of moving forward from that, in addition to needing to ask the right questions and making sure that those are informative, you also need to cater the questions that you're asking to the groups that you're meeting with. Typically in an interview, you're gonna actually be having interviews with a whole bunch of different groups. So not only is the university interviewing you, you're kind of interviewing the university as well. So you're likely gonna be meeting with your potential supervisor, future coworkers, campus partners, and maybe even students. So making sure that you prepare a whole bunch of questions and have some of those questions for each of those groups so that you can learn as much as you possibly can that meet those components and the non-negotiables that you thought about in the last slide with Shelby. So for example, if you're meeting with your supervisor, you might want to ask them about what their supervisory style is. What are their expectations of their future employee, and how available do they make themselves? So I know for me, for example, I really like to have a good open communication with my supervisor. So I don't need to meet with them constantly, but I want them to be available to me so that if I have questions, I can reach out to them. Maybe you're the opposite end. Maybe you're super independent and you want your supervisor to be hands-off. So figuring out what those things are and then making sure you're asking those questions when you're interviewing with the supervisor. If you're meeting with coworkers, that could be a good time to ask about your supervisor. So maybe you've already met with your supervisor, they've said something to you, and now you're meeting with the coworkers and you're kind of making sure that what they say about them matches what you've already learned so far. And that can kind of give you a better perception of what that supervisory style looks like for your future supervisor. You can also learn how coworkers relate to one another. If there is some bad blood, you'll probably pick up on that. If they're a great group of friends, you'll probably pick up on that. So trying to pay attention to that, asking if they hang out outside of work, what are those things that you're looking for in a coworker group? Like I said, do you want a family feel, or do you want that independence and kind of that separate, I go home at the end of the day and that's that? I always like to ask what their favorite and least favorite part of the job is at that point as well. That gives you an opportunity to maybe see the tougher side of the job without having your supervisor as part of the meeting as well. If you meet with campus partners, you might want to ask about the campus culture and the students and see what they have to say, what their perspective is of the students. You can also learn how your office works with other offices on campus. Is there a lot of collaboration, or does your office kind of stand alone on its own? And again, what you're looking for might differ from other people as well. Finally, if you're meeting with students, asking them how they perceive the office that you're potentially going to work in. So do they have a positive impression of that office, or do they say, oh, I don't know, I don't really hear from them, I never meet with them, I don't know anything about them? Because at that point, that might be a little bit of a red flag for you as well. You can also ask them what they're looking for in a candidate. So this really gives you the opportunity to prove yourself as a student advocate. So talking with them and making sure that what you're hoping to do in that position aligns with what they're looking for in someone new in that office. Additionally, jobs should create these spaces for you to interview with these different groups. So if you get to that last round, potentially an on-campus, and you've never met with students or had a conversation, or they haven't provided the space to meet with campus partners, it's okay to ask for that. It's okay to say, hey, I saw the schedule and I realized I'm not really going to get to talk to students. I would really love the opportunity to connect with them, to learn a little bit more about the university. And a job should be willing to grant that. So if they're not, again, that might be a little bit of a red flag. And then the final thing I want to touch on this slide is kind of going back to one of the components I mentioned earlier is your salary range. So before you go to a job interview, it's really important to do some research on what the cost of living might be for the place where your new job is going to be. So figure out how much is it going to cost for you to live comfortably based on what your needs are, and then taking the salary that's being offered to you and the benefits package and making sure that that really fulfills those needs. And also knowing that you can negotiate. So even if there's no wiggle room for negotiating a salary, which a job will likely tell you, they would tell you that if you weren't allowed to do it, you can negotiate other things. So you can negotiate other benefits like vacation days, moving expenses, and so on. So thinking those things through and making sure that you are negotiating and seeing what you can get from the position before you start there as well.
Awesome. So now Anna and I are going to share a little bit about our own experiences through the job search and how we both determined that the University of Richmond, obviously that's where we both ended up, was the correct and the right fit for us. So for me, I can be honest, when I started my job search, I was not very good about being intentional about where I was applying. I knew I wanted to stay East Coast, but beyond that, I was just kind of throwing my application out anywhere. So public, private, large, small, all residence-like jobs, but all different types of positions. And it became apparent as I was going through the interview process for these different positions that I was getting really tired of writing all the cover letters and doing all the research and then getting into the interview and not actually being excited about the institution or the job. And so I kind of did the whole thing backwards, where I was already in the search when I started to reflect on what was really important to me. And so when I did that reflection and I thought more about what positions and institutions that I was interviewing at that made me really excited, and when I was interviewing with them, I was like, I have a really great feeling about this. There was 3 things that came up for me and that were really helpful. One was the size of institution. I went to a really small undergrad, and then my graduate work was at a larger, I would say more mid-sized, but my undergrad was like 1,000 students. This was like 10,000 students, so it felt much larger. And so it was important to me to go back to a campus that was smaller, to work on a smaller team where I felt like I had a little bit more of a voice, to work in a smaller division where there was opportunities for me to get involved. Not that there aren't those at larger institutions, but I think that I have an easier time when I'm working in that smaller environment. So that was something that came up as being important to me. Another thing was team dynamics and office culture. I'm sure that everyone can think of an example of a time that they worked on a team that was dysfunctional, that didn't work well together, did not really like each other. And that really impacts your experience. You can be really excited about your job responsibilities. You can be really excited about where you're working and where you're living. And if you dread going to work every day, that's not going to be a good experience. So this, as Anna was talking about on the last slide too, comes out the most, I think, in your on-campus interview. You can obviously ask questions about this and different rounds of your interview process, but I think you can observe this the most when you are interviewing. And I asked this a lot, like in a lot of the different interviews that I was in. So you can ask campus partners, how do you see the residence life office working together? What are ways that you could collaborate with them? If that, for example, was my search in residence life. And then you can specifically ask the team that you do want to work on, how do you all collaborate? How do you work through conflict? What does your relationships look like outside of work? Do you have personal relationships? Are they largely professional? And then asking that supervisor, how do you see the team dynamics working? And I think you'll get a sense, you'll really be able to see who really does enjoy working together and who doesn't. And if there are just different tension areas that kind of come up, those do become pretty obvious in those interview settings. So, and then lastly was the job content and responsibilities. I was working as a resident director in my grad work, and so I knew that wherever I was moving to next that experience was probably gonna mirror a lot of what I did in grad school. So I wanted to find a position that had a little bit more variety in it, outside of the typical RA supervision, overseeing an area, conduct, stuff like that. Just because I also wasn't super sold on housing when I was going through my job search, to be honest. And so I wanted to find something that was going to provide me with a little bit more variety so I could also explore other functional areas. And so when I got to close to the end of my search, it ended up that I had 3 opportunities that I was weighing against each other, and that I was really excited about all 3. And I really had to go back in order to decide, and they all felt like they were really great fits. And so I went back and kind of compared them against these list of things that were important to me. And all 3 really had that same, they were all relatively small institutions, had smaller fields, smaller staffs. I really could see myself working with that group of people. When it came to team dynamics, they all were groups that seemed to really enjoy being around each other, working together. But the University of Richmond really came out to the front when I was looking at the job content and responsibilities. In this role, I was going to get different opportunities that the other positions were pretty similar to each other, and the University of Richmond was different and was going to provide me with, like I said, opportunities that I wouldn't get elsewhere. And so that ultimately, though I had 3 opportunities, like I said, that felt like they were all good fits. When I went back and really evaluated them against my list, it was pretty obvious that the University of Richmond was what was the best fit for me. I think other ways that people and other things that I weighed when I was trying to figure out what was the best opportunity was returning to those non-job related factors. My family lives in North Carolina, so Virginia is a close drive from them. And then also talking through my pros and cons with trusted peers and mentors, people who know me well as a professional, and who have also mentored me through my experiences and who know my strengths and weaknesses and what positions I would do well in. So those were 2 things that were also helpful.
So even though Shelby and I both ended up in the same place, I think we had very different paths getting here because we had different non-negotiables and different components, but we both ended up finding a good fit here. For me, I attended the University of North Carolina at Greensboro for grad school, and I worked in the Dean of Students office. So my kind of 10 years down the road, like Shelby was telling you to think about, is working as a dean. I would love to be a dean of students. And in speaking with my supervisor at that time, she really pointed out to me that it would be really important to have some housing and residence life experience, which I was never an RA. I never did anything like that, didn't do any of that in grad school. So for me, my job search was trying to find a place that would take a chance on me. But when I went into the job search, I didn't feel too confident in that. So I applied to both res life positions and also to academic advising positions. So a few months into my search, I went through an interview process with a university up in Maryland for an academic advising position, and I ended up getting offered an on-campus. So I came on campus and a lot of my non-negotiables were met. I had a great feeling about my supervisor. It was really close to some family that I have up there. I was able to, have my cats because I was going to be getting my own apartment, things like that. But at the same time, some of those non-negotiables were not met. So when I came on campus, I really only met a few people. And everyone that was going to be in that office was going to be a new hire, which came across to me as a pretty big red flag. And then I also was going to be sharing my office with 2 of these other new people. And I know for me that having my own space can be really important for me to be able to focus and get things done. So the idea of sharing was going to be a little bit tougher for me. It was something that I probably would have been fine with if there weren't other red flags and things that kind of made me feel like, I don't know if this is a good fit for me. Additionally, my contact with students was going to look a little bit weird. I was going to see a lot of students every day, but for very short periods of time, and every day was going to be very, very similar. So even though I love my supervisor, the location was perfect, the salary was great, all of these things, I left still feeling uncertain. And something that was really hard for me was I didn't have any other job prospects at that time. I had no other interviews lined up. So for me, turning that down was very, very hard, because I was like, what if I turn this down and I don't end up with another offer? However, that feeling about knowing that it wasn't a good fit just stuck with me, and I decided I'd rather wait a little bit longer and be in more of a bind and find something that did fit than accept something that was going to be really tough and I'd probably want to leave in a year or 2. And I did have the privilege to be able to make that decision. But ultimately, I did turn it down, which was hard. But fortunately for me, within 2 weeks of turning down that offer, I did hear from the University of Richmond. And honestly, from day one of the interview process, it was a very positive experience for me. In the Skype interview, the coworkers that I met with were fabulous. They made me feel really comfortable about not having that prior res life experience. They really listened to me when I talked about the transferable skills that I had in ways that I felt like I could make up for that lack of experience. On campus, I met with so many different people. I had a meeting with up to 15 different campus partners. I got to meet with students. I met with my supervisor with my coworkers. I met with my coworkers separate from my supervisor. So they really gave me that space to ask all the questions that I had and to learn about the university. And I felt like my supervisor shared a similar supervisory style to the one that I had at Greensboro, and I had a great relationship with her. So that felt really comfortable to me. It felt like it would be an easy transition with him. And then also I learned that my coworker team was a very close-knit unit, and they acted almost as a family. And that's something that I was looking for. I wanted to be able to text them and have a personal relationship outside of just the professional one. And that was the vibe that I got from them during that interview process. So all of that kind of came together, and then getting the salary and benefits package, it met that baseline salary that I had done some research on. I felt very comfortable with all of that. And I felt like all of those things that I thought about at the beginning of my job search, all of those kind of had check marks next to them. So even if there are a few things that I could come up with that weren't perfect, everything else came together so strongly that it did feel like a perfect fit for me. And it's been a great experience so far. So I'm very, very grateful that I went with my gut and turned down that prior opportunity. And I want to tell you guys that sometimes that's necessary. I know that it won't always be possible. Sometimes the need for a job trumps anything else. But if you have the flexibility and you're able to, and something just doesn't feel right, then that might be the right choice for you. So don't be scared to turn something down if you have the flexibility to do it. Because that certainly worked out in my case. But I feel like I know that feeling of, oh my gosh, I have to take a job. So just a little bit of food for thought. But that wraps up our formal presentation. Typically in person, we leave some time at the end for y'all to ask questions. We can't do that in this format. However, you have contact information, and that can get forwarded to us. So if you do have any questions, we'd love to hear from you guys. Feel free to forward that. And just remember that your experience is completely different from anyone else's. So what your job search looks like is going to be very different from your peers. What you're looking for in a job, very different from your peers. And you can't do it wrong. So focus on what's important to you, and you'll be fine.
Hope you enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you so much for watching our presentation. Hope it was helpful for you all in some way.
Thanks, everybody.